We're about to celebrate Thanksgiving in 2020, and so on Sunday we took a break from our study of Second Thessalonians to topically look at the holiday of Thanksgiving, and we talked about the origins of this holiday and how it's a time that's set aside for Americans to take a break from our labors and give thanks to God for His providence and for all of His blessings. We worked through the grand tradition of doing this in the Bible, and we talked about also the traditions in the U.S. and England that led up to this becoming a national holiday that was signed into effect by President Lincoln. After that, then, we also looked at a story of Thanksgiving from the book of Luke. Now, something that's very interesting to me through all of this is God's timing. In our study in Second Thessalonians, we've recently been spending a lot of time working through how Satan works. He attacks us through deception and through lies. That's primarily his strategy and how he goes about this. And we're working through that just because that's where we happen to be in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Paul was talking to the Thessalonians about this very thing. This is what we happen to be studying. And like I said, we took a break from this to topically look at Thanksgiving, but I couldn't help notice the coincidental timing of satanic attacks here when I was preparing for the Thanksgiving message. Our culture has been under attack for a long time, and I guess the latest casualty in this battle is our Thanksgiving holiday. I didn't realize how far things had gone until I started poking around on the internet trying to prepare for last Sunday's message. I was looking for some history of the holiday, really trying to find some good Thanksgiving story that might have taken place in a foxhole in World War II or something like that I could tie back into Sunday's sermon. But what I noticed instead when Googling this is that the internet seems pretty convinced now that Thanksgiving is a racist holiday. Seriously, here's what I found when looking for a GI Thanksgiving war story. So this is the first story I came across. It's from Business Insider, and it says, "How the True Story of Thanksgiving Ended in a War." And the conclusion of the article says, "Popular memory has largely clung to the innocuous image of a harvest celebration while ignoring the deadly forces that would ultimately drive apart the descendants of the guests of that very feast. Modern-day Thanksgiving may be a celebration of people coming together, but that's not the whole story when it comes to the history of this day." The second article is from the Smithsonian Magazine, and it's entitled "The Myths of Thanksgiving Story and the Lasting Damage They Imbue." And the byline says, "In truth, massacres, disease, and American Indian tribal politics are what shaped the Pilgrim Indian Alliance at the root of the holiday." This one was my favorite. This is from the New York Times. It's entitled "Everything You Learned About Thanksgiving is Wrong." And here, the New York Times sets the record straight. They tell us the Pilgrims really weren't coming here to exercise religious freedom. They say there was actually no planned diversity at that first Thanksgiving meal. They said there weren't really any Indians there, but if they did happen to be there, it wasn't because they were invited. They were probably just there on a diplomatic mission. The timing just lined up. Like, they just happened to be in the neighborhood when the Pilgrims were sitting down to eat. It was all just a coincidence. And I gotta say, this is an amazing piece of journalism here. The New York Times was able to cut through all the facts we know about what happened back then, and they were able to glean the real reason why things were the way they were. Here's one from Business Insider, and it says that Thanksgiving feasts were happening well before the Pilgrims showed up. Here's some quotes here. "Popular memory has largely clung to the innocuous image of a harvest celebration while ignoring the deadly forces that would ultimately drive apart the descendants of the guests of that very feast. Modern-day Thanksgiving may be a celebration of people coming together, but that's not the whole story when it comes to the history of the day." And here's what all these articles seem to have in common. They acknowledge there was a feast in 1621, but they say there were feasts all the time. And then they point out that in 1675, there was some fighting. And so they say the true story of Thanksgiving isn't the feast of 621, it's the fighting that happened 54 years after that first event took place. Yes, it's the same geography, but that is a whole generation of people different from the original celebration that took place. There is, in reality, absolutely no connection whatsoever, but we can't let that stop us. Here's an article from the Modern War Institute, and this says, "Today is all about tradition, turkey and stuffing, family, friends, and football. But how did Thanksgiving become Thanksgiving? As it turns out, this particular holiday's history is inextricably linked to America's military history." And here's one from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and it says, "At noon on Thanksgiving, a group of Native Americans and their allies will gather at Coles Hill above Plymouth Rock, but it's not to celebrate. Instead, they will take part in a solemn observation of the 50th National Day of Mourning. We remember the millions of our ancestors who were murdered by uninvited European colonists such as the Pilgrim," says Munimum James, co-leader of the United American Indians of New England, in a statement. "Today, we and many indigenous people around the country say, no thanks, no giving." And listen, I didn't cherry pick these articles here. This is just the first several articles in my research. Like, all of them were like this, and it goes on like this, article after article after article. There was one sort of innocuous article about GIs eating Spam in World War II on Thanksgiving, but then we were right back to all the articles on the racist origins of the holiday, with names like The Invention of Thanksgiving, The Real Story of Thanksgiving, and The Brutal Dark History Behind the Origins of Thanksgiving. And look at the related searches suggested at the bottom of Google here. Thanksgiving Massacre, Thanksgiving Dark History, Myths about Thanksgiving. It's an amazing thing. All of it is tied together, and all of this is revisionist garbage, every single bit of it. All right, so what exactly is going on here? I'm of an age where I can remember back to a different time when we as a culture used to believe different things about this holiday. It's no surprise, really, to most of us that the culture has changed. And I'll give you two factors that I think have caused this shift from our holiday being one of thankfulness to one that's now portrayed as a shameful, racist celebration of ignorance. The first factor here is that our American worldview has changed. I was blessed to spend my childhood during the Reagan years, and back then it seemed, to me at least, that our popular culture viewed the rest of the world through the lens of American exceptionalism and patriotism. It was an optimistic time. It was a lot of fun. The good guys still wore white hats, and people didn't use the term American dream, ironically. That was our collective worldview, so when we looked at Thanksgiving, it just made sense to be thankful, because obviously God had blessed America just like we asked him to in our patriotic songs. That was pretty straightforward, but somewhere along the line, all of that changed. We shifted our worldview from a patriotic one to one that's more of a social justice worldview today. And that means that today, everything that we consider, everything that we encounter must be evaluated and judged through a lens of race and gender. The Thanksgiving holiday can't be evaluated in the context in which it actually took place the first time. We have to evaluate every part of it now, looking at how this affected one people group versus another. So that's the first factor. Our worldview has changed. And the second factor is we've taken God almost completely out of our culture by now. We took God out of the schools. We took God out of the courtroom. We've systematically removed references to Jesus from polite society. And so since we've done that everywhere else, we have to take God out of Thanksgiving too. Because if we're now a society that denies the relevance of the God of the Bible, there certainly can't be room for a holiday where we give thanks to him, right? So some time ago, the purpose of the holiday was changed from, as President Lincoln originally provisioned, recognizing the providence of God and giving thanks to him, to now it's just a day where we experience general feelings of gratitude. It's no longer about worship. It is about us experiencing a feeling. And so when we put these two things together, a new worldview and a denial of God, it's no wonder that our society is now looking down on Thanksgiving. So popular thought then is this holiday must be celebrating the genesis of feelings of gratitude in the new world. Like we're celebrating the first time anyone felt thankful on this continent. And then we have to say, well, if that's the case, wait a minute, there were people who were here before us. And so to say this feast was the first time people were generally thankful in North America, that must mean either that we believe the Native Americans must be incapable of experiencing this emotion, or we grant them that ability but just say they don't matter. Both of these conclusions are unacceptable, and so therefore Thanksgiving must be a racist construct, right? Well, that's how the story goes, at least. That's not my view, but that's my understanding of how we wound up with all these articles that I pointed out earlier. But there's some serious flaws with this logic. All this negativity comes from imputing social justice values on a revisionist version of the historical event. The fact of the matter is, this was not a group of people saying they were experiencing general gratitude for the first time in a geographical area. This was a group of people who recognized God had spared their lives and they were thanking him for it. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 16 to 18 says, "Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus." The Pilgrims at that first Thanksgiving had been through a brutal winter. They'd lost many people, but they knew their Bibles, and they knew that it was the providential hand of God that had delivered them from their trials. And so they gave thanks. They gave thanks like the Bible told them to do. And later on, President Lincoln, in his wisdom, declared to our nation that we should never forget the lesson of what the Pilgrims did. And then in the middle of the Civil War, he set up a national holiday to recognize that God had delivered us, God was delivering us, and would always be the one to deliver us from our trials. It's simple, it's profound, and there is absolutely nothing racist about this at all. And think of the irony here. We had this day back in 1621 where people of multiple races came together to thank God for his blessings, and this gets commemorated as a national holiday by the great emancipator himself while we're fighting a war to free the slaves. For some reason, people still manage to find racism in all of this. Move along, people. There is no racism to see here. So if this day really isn't steeped in racism, what's the deal? Why is this even a thing? Why do people care so much? Well, remember, this is a national holiday that's set up to honor God and give him thanks. And the simple truth is, a country that's turning away from God must then turn away from this holiday too. Interestingly enough, the Bible tells us all about this type of rebellion in Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to 25. That says this: "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness." Skip down to verse 21. "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal human beings and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over to the sinful desires of their hearts, to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator who is forever praised." Amen. Well, that about sums up the world we're living in, doesn't it? Our society has exchanged the truth of God for a lie. They refuse to glorify him and give thanks to him. Our foolish hearts have collectively been darkened. And as such, there is absolutely no way that our culture can allow the fourth Thursday of the month of November to continue to be a day where we as a people rest from our labors, gather together with family, and remember all God has done for us and give thanks to him. Hope this has been helpful. Hope it's been interesting. And until next time, Lord willing, there is a next time. May God bless you and your family, and may God bless America.